Deadpool and Wolverine fulfills the 15-year-long dream of the duo's cinematic team-up, but it's also the first proper entry of the Fox X-Men into the MCU, which means that it had the chance to pay tribute to the Marvel movies that came before it. For months, fans speculated that big names like Professor X or Magneto would appear alongside the original cast of the X-Men, but none of that happened. Instead, they chose to do something very different, and if you know the history, it's actually really clever. Marvel spent decades in the 70s and 80s failing to get movies made. While DC had success with Batman and Superman, Marvel's first movie, Howard the Duck, was kind of an embarrassment. Their Punisher movie was not much better, and their Fantastic Four movie was so bad that they never even released it. Marvel wasn't a movie studio yet, so they made money licensing out their character rights to other studios, but the money from that wasn't enough to save them. With comic book sales declining in the 90s, Marvel fell in and out of bankruptcy multiple times, and in the aftermath of various mergers and acquisitions, the company ultimately fell into the full control of Avi Arad and Ike Perlmutter, two businessmen who had previously run a company called Toy Biz, the company which owned the rights to make Marvel toys. But now they didn't just own the toys, they ran everything at Marvel, including the comics, TV, and movies. But they had no money. So after moderate success making cartoons like X-Men, whose primary purpose was to sell toys, which they did a very good job of, their next step was to make movies. The first success was 1998's Blade. It was serious, well-made, and received positively by critics and fans. Blade was pivotal, and it spurred them on to make more movies, like X-Men in 2000, which was followed by even bigger hits like Spider-Man, which at the time had the biggest opening weekend ever, making $114 million in 2002. But for all these successes, there were a lot more failures, movies that were ignored or forgotten, either because they weren't very good or they just didn't resonate with audiences at the time. Most of these were made by 20th Century Fox, like the X-Men franchise, the Fantastic Four movies, Daredevil, and Elektra. But it wasn't just Fox. Sony made the Spider-Man movies and 2 Ghost Rider movies. Universal made the Hulk, Lionsgate made 2 Punisher movies, and all 3 Blade movies were made by New Line Cinema. It took Marvel years before they made their own movies, starting with Iron Man in 2008. But taking the risk to do that was a big deal for a comic book and toy company, and it only happened because Avi Arad and Ike Perlmutter had seen proof that other studios could release movies using Marvel characters and actually make a ton of money doing it. Without the success of Blade, Spider-Man, and the X-Men, the MCU would have never happened. Marvel owe a debt to the movies that came before. They gifted them so many things, like Kevin Feige, the president of Marvel Studios and creator of the MCU. He got his very first job in Hollywood as an assistant to the producer on the first X-Men movie, and after that, he produced Daredevil, Hulk, Fantastic Four, Elektra, and so many other movies, all before the MCU was even an idea. But the thing is, these movies weren't really cool back then. They weren't in the cultural mainstream. Going to Comic-Con wasn't flashy. It was just a bunch of nerds talking about actual comic books. So when Marvel made $1 billion with the Avengers in 2012 and became the dominant force in modern pop culture, it's easy to forget where they started. When Deadpool gets the chance to join the sacred timeline in the MCU, he's told that he can finally matter, that he can finally leave behind his universe and join the best of the best, the Avengers. And this goes beyond fiction toward an interesting meta-commentary. It's not a coincidence that the meaning here applies to the real world too. For years, the Fox movies, the Sony movies, and all the others were made fun of for being bad, for being boring, for not being connected to the MCU, and therefore not being real Marvel movies. If the MCU was the real thing, then the other movies were just the jokes left on the sideline, which is why when these older characters return in Deadpool and Wolverine, it's a little emotional. And who better to give them one final send-off than Ryan Reynolds? He knows what it's like to sit on the sidelines with your character being ignored. Believe it or not, this isn't the first time Deadpool and Wolverine have met. They first met in 2009's X-Men Origins, except Deadpool looked like this and none of it made much sense at all. After years of campaigning and pretty much admitting that he leaked the test footage for Deadpool, Reynolds finally got his movie made. And back then, Deadpool was a risk. It was R-rated, not family-friendly, and nobody knew who the character was. But it was a huge hit, and it changed the superhero genre forever. 10 years later, and Deadpool is ironically the only thing to survive from the Fox universe and make the jump into the MCU after the Disney merger. But in the wreckage, a lot of other characters got left behind. So where do we find these characters? In the void, a nowhere place made up of literal garbage that's been discarded from dying universes which have no reason to exist. Whether it's Elektra, who says that Ben Affleck's Daredevil is already dead, or Johnny Storm, who finds himself alone without the Fantastic Four, or even Blade, who never quite got his ending in the much-maligned Blade Trinity. Some of these characters are such a mess that they never even existed in the first place. Like Channing Tatum, who spent years saying that he'd play Gambit, even announcing his own movie at Comic-Con in 2015, where he got on stage with Stan Lee and all the X-Men plus the Fantastic Four and Ryan Reynolds 10 years ago. Well, nothing happened, but after all this, he finally got his moment. Deadpool and Wolverine could have done the easy thing and shown us Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man or Patrick Stewart and the X-Men, but they didn't. In classic Deadpool fashion, they assembled a team of forgotten heroes, representing a bygone era that set the stage for the future. So as Deadpool and Wolverine jump into the portal and head to the future, they wave goodbye to the characters that represent Marvel's past, a legacy of movies that set the foundation for what would eventually become the MCU. And I couldn't help but be emotional. They finally got their ending. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video essay and want to see more, subscribe for new videos every week.